I'm going to be talking today a little bit about my research, which has gone for about a decade and a half, I believe. Studying how do we create environments. We've heard all these inspirational stories about, people doing amazing things through the arts, and I've been, crying and feeling very moved. But a lot of my work is on how do we set up educational environments so that people can, thank you, much better, so that people can learn and acquire these skills and engage in the arts in these ways. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So one of the first pieces that got me thinking on this is a visual arts piece. It's a sculpture. This is by a young lady that I worked with who, when she started a program in the arts at 14 years old, wasn't that interested in the arts. She went to this private school, and you're supposed to focus on the arts, and she said, okay, I'll focus on an art. I guess I'll do visual arts. And the first piece I saw her do was a drawing, and it was fairly mediocre, and I asked her, what were you doing with this drawing? Tell me about what you were doing. I was trying to understand learning in the arts. And she said, I was trying to do what the teacher said, trying to do it right. It was kind of the first thing she did. But over the course of 3 to 4 years, she came with her own vision of how she's going to do things. And so this is a sculpture about this high. But what's impressive about it, it's an interesting piece of work for a 17, 18-year-old student to create. But the thing that impresses me most is that she had a vision for how she wanted it to be. She cut out thousands of these blocks to map. She was trying to create an image of this gear system, and she was trying to create it into 3D form. So she's cut out thousands of these tiny blocks, measured them carefully, assembled them. She builds it to this height and comes to realize that she hasn't thought through the weight and the curve, and the whole thing is not going to stand. And I said, well, it's quite a lovely sculpture. Just up to here, you could stop building. You could stop there. That's a perfectly fine place to stop. You've achieved a beautiful sculpture. But she said, no, I have a vision. I want to see what I've envisioned. I want to see it real. And so she took apart the entire thing. She went to the math department in her high school and said, tell me what I need to know to make this stand. And she hates math. She said, I hate math. I never do math. But she sat there and she calculated out the weights, calculated out the arc of the circle that she needed to do to make this sculpture stand. It was hundreds of hours of work because she had an idea in her mind and wanted to make it real. And I think that when Homer was talking about discipline, this is what we mean. How do you make somebody want to do something excellent, to care about that, and to see the difference between stopping it at the point in which is pretty good and continuing it on to achieve the full vision? So we started looking at this, my colleagues at Harvard Project Zero and we looked at what habits of mind, and we were focusing on the visual arts here. What habits of mind are taught and learned in the visual arts, and how? How are they taught? And so this is the sort of research stuff we basically went to 5 different high-quality arts classrooms. So these are schools that are devoted to the arts, who are teaching people seriously in the arts, and we did lots of observations and interviews. And then what we decided was most important was the individualized interactions. It wasn't so much the design of the program or anything like that. It was the individualized interactions between teachers and students. So we analyzed 4,179 of these interactions. What is a teacher doing with their student? And then we looked at students' learning by talking to them over periods of time. So when they started, so the young woman, I saw her when she started, I saw her 4 years later. And I interviewed her year after year with her work, seeing where she's growing. From all this, we came up with a model based on all these analyses of 8 habits of mind that in the visual arts, and there's analogs, people have done the same analogs in dance and in music now based on our work, but there's 8 things that teachers are just working together to develop for students. And the first one is there's a sense of craft. How do you develop a craft? How do you learn to use tools, techniques, materials? Another one is how do you engage and persist? How do you get an idea of a problem to work on and keep going? In the visual arts, envisioning is really important, gaining a mental image in your mind, manipulating it, transforming it. And the purpose of it is to express an idea, a meaning, communicate something to somebody else. And also for the visual arts, observation is key. Every art teacher we talk to, everything we observe is centered in looking. Everybody thinks they know how to look. Everybody thinks they know how to see. But a visual artist will tell you, you don't know how to see. You need to look beyond the surface. You need to look carefully. You need to notice every day. Reflection was an important piece, that part of your work is to notice what you're doing, understand what you're doing, think about it. And then stretching and exploring. This is the lovely thing about the arts, is that you could be perfect, but you're not done. Because the purpose of the arts is always to stretch your capacities a little bit further, to explore a new area. And teachers, we just saw thousands of interactions of teachers just telling students, push a little bit more, try something a little different, even if they're doing great. There's just this constant sense of continuous growth, that's what art is about, is how do you get more? How do you get better? How do you try something new and explore it? Even if it means your performance is going to go down a little bit, or you'll do something a little bit worse, it's worth it just to keep trying. And then understanding art world. Why do we make art? Why do we do these things? How do we do it? What artists have come before us? So all these things together form what we call sort of a model of artistic mind. And when we observed classes, the way they did, there's basically 3 structures in a studio art class in what we observed. There's some kind of demonstrations. So the teacher is demonstrating things. It's usually very visual. It's not just a lot of talking. It's showing something. Then there's a time of students at work. And this is students are doing some kind of work, but this is where the teacher is most active, and this is what we analyze most closely. The teacher is an attentive, knowledgeable observer of students' work and is making individualized interactions, personalized to each student. When we observed these classes, there was an average of 75 individualized interactions per hour. So as a teacher, this isn't a high school class. A teacher is going around making 75 interactions per hour on average. They're not measuring these perfectly. This is just what over time it averaged out to be. And then finally, critique is a really important part of an educational system. Is everybody pauses and looks at each other's work and talks about what's working, what's not, what is it communicating, what ideas do we see. Some of it's evaluative, but some of it's just noticing, taking time to look at the work that's been created and reflecting on it as a group. Then the final piece is that we didn't realize this. So we wrote a first book about this, and then we recently just wrote a second edition, and we added this new piece, which is exhibition. An important part of the arts, whether you're in performing arts, visual arts, music, any of the arts, is that it's not just for you, it's not just in the class. There's an audience. There's an authentic audience who's going to respond to you, and that's an incredibly motivating force. You're not just handing it into a teacher who privately decides how good you are and then gives it back to you and you sort of slink away in private with your grade in secret. It's a public performance. You're communicating an idea. But really, like I mentioned before, the heart of studio teaching is just the thousands, literally thousands, of interactions that a teacher has with their students, thoughtfully guiding their work. So what I'm going to be talking about today is to carry about how do we take some of that studio model to other educational environments that aren't the most elite, art institutions. And the things I want you to hold in mind are this idea of individualized instruction. Like I said, 75 interactions per hour. Think about that. These are classes of 20 kids. It's not, a private tutoring situation. Fully 1/3 of these interactions with teachers, where teachers are interacting with students while they work, are getting them to reflect, to ask questions about their work, to explain what they're thinking about, to step out of the work for a moment and think about their ideas. And finally, while craft is an important part, on average we found about 28% of the interactions that teachers had with students were about improving their craft in some way, working with technique, some material process, but it was almost never in isolation. So it wasn't just telling you about technique, it was technique in order to. What are you trying to communicate with? I want you to explore this new technique because you're getting caught in a rut here. And so it's communicating, why do you have technique? And how does it fit in the larger art piece rather than just technique for the sake of technique? So these are fabulous experiences, but sadly, the majority of kids don't get high quality arts education. They don't spend most of their time creating. This tells you most of kids spend most of their time consuming things that other people have created, right? The Kaiser Family Foundation has been doing studies of children's media consumption since 1999, and this is shocking to me how much it is. This is how much time kids spend, 8 to 18 years old, spend consuming media outside of school, outside of homework, is on average is 7.5 hours a day. And it's actually 10 hours and 45 minutes a day of media exposure because people do multiple things at the same time, so kids might be listening to music as they're playing a video game. And it's not, there's nothing bad. I mean, listening to music is a wonderful thing, and people like TV, and there's good things about it, but it's dominating, consumption is dominating children's lives. And so this was something I became interested in when, with my colleague Dr. Kevin Clark, we started saying, okay, we work with all these kids who are interested in the arts. What about the kids who don't know that they're interested in creating? What about kids who just really like video games? Are they going to come to a great performance on a Saturday? Are they going to come to any of our classes? No, most of them won't. When we ask them, are you interested in the arts, they say no. But we thought that if you could teach somebody to design and create in the medium that they're interested in, that will change the way they consume it. I know this as an artist. I'm a visual artist myself. I know that I cannot look at anything without thinking like a creator. And I imagine most of you who have an art form have the same experience. And so I thought, okay, I can't change the fact that these kids want to play 7 hours of computer games a day, but I can change the way they look at those games. I can give them another lens on it. And so this was work that was funded by the National Science Foundation. I always have to mention that. So we teamed up with a program in DC, in a DC public school. We were working them for several years. It's about 500 kids over the course of 4 years that we've worked with, and primarily African American kids. That's the population. Mainly Title I schools, so traditionally underserved populations, not a lot of resources. And there was an existing program that was teaching this game design, and I thought that was such a great idea. And so we went to the existing program and just observed what they were doing and tried to understand how we could work with it. And it really was taught much more as a standard computer class. So a lot of great things. They were giving access to high professional level technology. Kids were getting exposed to tools for creating with media, but they really weren't treating it like a studio. So as a result, you have the teacher kind of leading step by step through the software. You have little design process. So a design process, you come up with an idea, you envision it, you enact it, you try it out, you revise it, there's some kind of critique. We didn't see any of that. We just saw basically students creating the same thing that the teacher had posed. And then a final piece was that mentoring was considered an important part of this program, but the mentors really these were kids, so they're high school kids who had some technical expertise, but they really weren't using their power. So these were kids who knew a lot about technology, but mainly what they were asked to do is take attendance, take kids who were from one group to another group, and most of the time when we observed them, they were sitting in the back of the room with their headphones on, listening to music while the class was going on, and not helping out because nobody really told them what being a mentor meant in this context. They didn't have any information. And so when we saw student work coming from this program, these are two different students' work. It was very simplistic, and while it was interesting that they're learning how to design games, they really weren't learning much, and there was not much variation. It looked a lot like the teacher model. So we said, these are great, this is the great potential here, but let's see what happens if we transform it to a studio environment. So by studio-based, we made it more open-ended challenges. And then we put the teacher in that sense of observer rather than the direct instructor, and used critique to make the learning more explicit. And then we used the peer mentors. We talked to them and said, your job, you know a lot about technology. Your job is to work alongside these kids. When they have an idea of what to design, you tell them what are some of the tools for doing it. So when we analyzed, we had the same high school teacher the first year and then the second year. So this we're seeing really what is the effect of teaching in a more studio way. First of all, the teacher did talk a lot less. The teacher did decide, oh, okay, I can do this. And so he about half of the time spent talking the second year as he did the first year. There was 5 times as much peer collaboration and mentorship relationships. And interesting, the mentors started initiating all these projects. So the same kids who were sitting in the back with their headphones on, which people were wondering, like, what's wrong with you? You're not taking your role seriously. Given the opportunity, they took their role seriously, and they, were initiating projects. The students who in the class who we before had all sorts of off-task behavior is what it's called, for those of you who are educators, where it's like they're texting, they're playing computer games that aren't the computer game they're supposed to be playing. The first year there were all sorts of problems. In the second year there were zero. Zero. There was not a single incidence of off-task behavior. Everybody worked all the time. And as a result, there were many more finished games, so a lot of students created a lot more games, and these were rated as more complex both in terms of computer programming and artistic design, and they were considered more creative. And so this is some screenshots from one of the students' games, and I used it because it's about the brain. This group of students wanted to enter into a science competition, so they made a game where you go through the body and you repair the brain, and you have all these different screenshots. There's like a neural pathways and a carotid artery. Have a little spelling errors, they're still working on it. But the most important piece that we found was that the mentors ended up taking on these kinds of responsibilities. So as soon as we opened up the educational environment, more students wanted to be mentors. And then the mentors started taking responsibility. So we lost our funding. It was the end of the funding cycle, as always is the case with grants, and the students said, and we lost access to the site of the school, so we lost our site and our funding. Usually that means, okay, program closes and we go on. The kids said, oh no, we want to do this, we want to keep doing this. We'll do it for free, we'll run the program, we'll do everything. And so in the end, we went from a model where 5 high school teachers taught the program to a model where 1/3 of the students took on some kind of teaching role in the program, and even 2 of the girls in the program wrote grants themselves. They're high school girls, they were 18 years old at the time, wrote grants to continue the program. So what I wanted to leave you with is that the studio model opens up the same kids who were showing behaviors that did not look like engaged students, they weren't students who showed up this way, can show dramatically different ways of working in the world when given support and opportunities. I now work in a place where you can make anywhere a studio environment. This is a studio problem of somebody brought in a broken wheelchair. And the problem essentially is, how do we fix this thing and what can we make with it? Anything can become a studio problem. It's an artistic way of thinking and a method of being an attentive adult who's looking around for what can you do, how can I help you do it, and how do I get other kids to work together so you can build on each other's skills. And I'll leave you with a quote that one of the students had, she didn't go on into art, she's going on to computer programming. But she says, when I asked her, so what are you going to do? And she said, maybe I can help out by making something that makes it easier to find criminals, or a program that improves the way they do business. If I do end up making video games, maybe I will innovate the way video games are seen, or maybe used in the classroom. I just would really like to make something better, as opposed to just, going with the flow. I would actually like to improve something at some point. And I think that's she wasn't somebody who was oriented to the arts, but from the studio experience, she got that sense of, my role is to have a vision in the world and create something in it. Thank you.